James had always been a quiet, dependable man. A janitor at a small tech company in the heart of the city, he had no desire for attention or recognition. His days were predictable. He would arrive early, sweep and mop the office floors, clean the restrooms, and take out the trash. Most of the employees never noticed him, and that was fine with James. He preferred to remain in the background, where his work spoke for itself. He lived alone in a modest apartment, his life a routine of quiet solitude with little excitement beyond the occasional Saturday night movie and a cup of coffee at the local diner. His job, although humble, had given him a sense of purpose. Over the years, he had grown fond of the office building. It was a place where people came to chase their dreams, and though he didn't have the grand ambitions that most of them did, he felt a small sense of pride in keeping the space clean and orderly. He was dependable. Reliable. The company never asked for much, and he never expected more. But there was always that lingering thought at the back of his mind: what would it be like to be seen as more than just the janitor? What would it be like to be important? It wasn't that he disliked his job. In fact, James had grown comfortable with the work. The days blurred together, one much like the other, but that was what he liked about it. There were no surprises. No risks. No expectations beyond the occasional compliment from his boss, Mr. Arnold, who had hired him over 5 years ago. Mr. Arnold was a good man, or at least James believed so. He was kind, albeit distant. He had his quirks, like everyone, but James didn't mind. He didn't need much from his boss. He'd never asked for more than what he was given. On this particular morning, however, things felt different. James arrived at work to find the office unusually quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights in the hallway more pronounced than usual. He set down his cleaning supplies, giving the place a quick once-over before heading to the break room. There, he found Mr. Arnold, sitting at one of the tables, a manila envelope resting in front of him. James walked in, offering a polite smile. "Morning, sir," he said, his voice low and steady, as usual. Mr. Arnold looked up, his face lighting up in a rare smile. "Ah, James. There you are. I was just about to come find you. I've got something for you." James paused, unsure what to make of it. "For me?" he asked, his brows furrowing. He didn't recall ever receiving anything other than a paycheck or the occasional holiday bonus. Mr. Arnold pushed the envelope across the table toward him. Yes. I've been meaning to give this to you for a while. It's a small gesture, but I think it might be a nice change for you. Something to help with, well, something to help with your future here." James hesitated, a mixture of confusion and curiosity settling in his chest. "Future," he repeated, his voice tinged with skepticism. "You've been with us for a long time, James," Mr. Arnold continued, folding his hands in front of him. "I've been impressed with your work ethic, how steady you are. I've noticed you around here every day, taking care of things, never complaining. It's rare to find someone like you. So, I thought it might be time for a little something to show my appreciation." James's chest tightened. He wasn't used to compliments, and when they did come, he never knew how to respond. He wasn't a man who wanted praise or accolades. He simply did his job, and that was enough. But Mr. Arnold was looking at him expectantly, waiting for a response. "I appreciate that, sir," James said, his voice steady but unsure. "But, really, you don't have to do anything for me." "Nonsense," Mr. Arnold replied with a wave of his hand. "I insist. Go ahead, open it." James slowly slid his fingers over the top of the envelope, the smooth paper resisting slightly as he pulled it open. Inside, there was a credit card, glossy and brand new, with his name printed on it. Next to the card, a small note was tucked inside. James pulled it out and read it. "James, you've been an incredible part of this team. It's time you start dressing the part. Take this, and buy yourself something that will help you feel like the professional I know you can be. Clothes make the man, after all. Don't be afraid to spend. You deserve it. James stared at the card in his hands, confused. He had never thought of himself as someone who needed new clothes. His work uniform was fine. A pair of worn jeans and a clean shirt. But this? This was something else entirely. Mr. Arnold's voice broke through his thoughts. Go on, James. Don't be shy. There's more than enough for whatever you need. You've earned it. James opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He stared at the card again. There was an amount listed on the back, a significant amount, far more than James had ever spent on himself. It made no sense. Why would Mr. Arnold want him to spend that much money? And why clothes? Well, thank you, sir, James said, though his mind was racing. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Mr. Arnold replied. Just know that we value you here. Take it as a step forward. A step forward. James wasn't sure what that meant. He hadn't asked for anything beyond his usual duties. He had never expected Mr. Arnold to see him as anything more than the janitor, and yet here he was, being handed an opportunity, or at least that's what it seemed like. What was he supposed to do with it? James left the break room, the envelope tucked carefully under his arm. He didn't know what to do next. He felt an unfamiliar mix of emotions. There was gratitude, of course, but also confusion. Was Mr. Arnold trying to promote him in some way? Was this part of a plan he hadn't been made aware of? He spent the rest of the day working in a daze. As he swept the floors, scrubbed the restrooms, and cleaned the windows, his mind kept drifting back to the envelope. Every now and then, he would catch a glimpse of his reflection in the glass of the windows, the thought nagging at him, was he really worth this? Did he deserve a chance to step out of the shadows? When his shift finally ended, James found himself standing outside the office, the envelope still in his hand. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the city streets, unsure of what to do next. He could take the money and buy himself clothes. But what kind of clothes? He had no idea. He didn't have the first clue about fashion, or what a professional wardrobe even looked like. All he knew was that he could buy whatever he wanted, as much as he wanted. It was an opportunity, but what kind of opportunity? Finally, after a few more moments of contemplation, he made his decision. He would go to the store. He would do it. For once, he would let himself have something nice. Something that would make him feel good, maybe even a little special. It was strange, though. The more he thought about it, the more it didn't feel like just buying clothes. It felt like something more, something that could change everything. Little did he know, this simple decision would mark the beginning of an unexpected journey, one that would force him to confront his own fears, his insecurities, and his place in the world. James stood outside the office building, the envelope still clutched in his hand, weighing heavily on his mind. The evening sky was dimming, the streetlights flickering on as the usual buzz of the city began to crescendo. The thought of going to a store to buy clothes seemed absurd. James had never been the type to indulge in things like shopping for anything beyond what he needed for work, just plain, functional items that could get him through the days. This was different. This wasn't about buying something practical, this was about treating himself, something he had never done before. He stood there for several minutes, almost paralyzed by the thought of walking into a clothing store and picking out something professional for himself. Was he really worthy of it? A janitor who had spent most of his life quietly going through the motions? But then again, the weight of the envelope, with its unexpected generosity, pushed him forward. He had spent too many years in the background, never feeling like he deserved anything beyond the basics. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to step outside of that comfort zone. Maybe this was the universe's way of telling him that he could be more than what he saw in the mirror. He finally walked to his car and drove toward the shopping district, the streets growing busier as night took full hold of the city. The idea of stepping into a store that wasn't just a convenience store or a fast food joint was intimidating, but as he parked and walked toward the entrance, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. Inside, the store was bright and airy, its polished floors reflecting rows upon rows of neatly folded clothes. It felt like a different world, one that James had never been part of. He walked past the racks, unsure of what to look for or even how to navigate through the aisles. The clothing in front of him seemed far more expensive than anything he had ever considered, and the brightly lit mannequins seemed to mock his unfamiliarity. What did he know about suits and dress shirts? The thought made his chest tighten. "Can I help you with anything, sir?" a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. James looked up to see a young sales associate, a woman with an eager smile and a friendly demeanor. She looked at him with a mix of curiosity and professionalism. James stammered, suddenly feeling out of place. "I'm just looking for something, for work." "Professional, I guess." The saleswoman nodded, her smile never wavering. "Of course, sir. Let's see what we have here." She led him toward the suits, the fabric a far cry from his usual simple work clothes. "Do you have a color preference? Or a size range you're comfortable with?" James shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know. I just need something, presentable." As she pulled a few items from the racks, James couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of panic creeping up on him. He wasn't used to being waited on like this. In fact, it felt like he was being put under a magnifying glass, every decision scrutinized as if the entire store were watching him. He looked at the clothes in front of him, polished, expensive items that seemed to represent a world far beyond his reach. Was he even allowed in this world? Did someone like him belong here? The sales associate held up a dark navy blue suit jacket. "This one's a classic. It'll make you look very sharp." She beamed. "It's perfect for anyone looking to step up their game." "Step up their game," James repeated under his breath, the phrase sticking with him. Did he really want to step up his game? What did that even mean? Was it a simple matter of buying clothes? Or was it about reinventing himself? The woman's voice brought him back to reality. "Try it on and see how it feels." James hesitated, then slowly followed her to the fitting rooms. The whole experience was surreal. He had never been the type to get excited about clothes. His uniform, a simple pair of jeans and a shirt, had always been enough. But now, in the changing room, he found himself facing a mirror that reflected a man he didn't recognize. The suit jacket fit awkwardly, and his reflection seemed to mock him with its unfamiliarity. He stared at his reflection, the man in the suit looking back at him as though he didn't belong. "Is everything okay in there?" the sales associate called from outside the fitting room. James took a deep breath and stepped out, hoping to feel something, anything, but the only thing he felt was discomfort. The jacket seemed too tight in places, and the trousers didn't fit quite right either. It wasn't him. It didn't feel like it was him. He half expected to walk into a room full of laughter. Who did he think he was, trying to wear something like this? But the saleswoman smiled encouragingly. "It looks good," she said. "But let's try a few more options, just to be sure." What happened next seemed like a blur. The sales associate continued to bring different suits and shirts, each one a little more expensive, a little more refined than the last. James didn't know how to stop her, and each time she asked him to try something on, he felt himself spiraling further into uncertainty. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't used to this world, to people who were confident in their own skin and knew exactly what they were doing. He was just the janitor, just the man who cleaned up after everyone. But in this moment, standing in front of a mirror that didn't recognize him, he felt like something inside him was shifting. Finally, after what seemed like hours, he picked a dark gray suit, a little less flashy, a little more subtle, but still something he could feel comfortable in. He paid for it with the card Mr. Arnold had given him, and as he left the store, his heart raced with a mix of excitement and dread. What had he just done? What was this feeling? As he drove home, the city lights reflecting off his rearview mirror, James found his mind swirling with questions. He had stepped out of his comfort zone, but was it really for the better? What did it mean to step up your game? Did clothes really have the power to change a person, to change the way they were seen in the world? Could something as simple as a suit really make a difference? That night, James couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in bed, the suit folded neatly on the chair across the room, staring at him. In the quiet of the night, the reality of the situation began to sink in. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. Mr. Arnold had seen something in him, something that James had never seen in himself. But the question remained, what would it take to truly step up his game? The next morning, James woke up with a lingering sense of uncertainty. The new suit, now neatly pressed and hung on a hook by the door, stood as a stark reminder of the previous evening's decisions. He had never put much thought into his appearance, and now, in the quiet of his small apartment, it felt like the suit was staring back at him, demanding a part of himself he wasn't sure he was ready to give. The whole experience had felt so surreal, like stepping into someone else's life for a brief moment, only to return to the mundane afterward. But as he got dressed and slipped into the tailored suit, something unexpected happened. He looked into the mirror and saw a version of himself he had never noticed before. The man looking back at him wasn't the janitor who had cleaned the floors for decades. This man seemed different. More confident, even though he still felt the same inside. There was a strange sense of power that came from looking the part. His reflection had an air of authority, like he could walk into a room and demand respect simply by the way he was dressed. For the first time in years, James felt like he could belong somewhere beyond the sterile, white-tiled floors of the office building. The janitor. The invisible worker. The person no one ever saw beyond the mop and bucket he carried. But now, with his collar sharp and his shoes polished, he felt like he could walk into the boardroom and speak up, like he could be more than just the person everyone ignored. As he walked out of the apartment and down the stairs to his car, he noticed something strange. People were looking at him. Not in the way they usually did, avoiding his gaze or hurrying past him, but with something more. Respect? Curiosity? It was hard to tell. The world seemed to treat him differently, just because of the way he was dressed. It was as if the suit had become a magic cloak, and with each step he took, his transformation was solidifying. Was this what it felt like to belong? Was this what it felt like to walk into a room with the power to change everything? James shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. No, he couldn't get caught up in the illusion. This wasn't who he was. He wasn't some corporate big shot, not really. The suit didn't change that. He was still the janitor, still the man who cleaned the floors for the people who sat behind the shiny desks. Still the person who lived in a modest apartment and struggled to make ends meet. This suit wasn't going to change his reality. But as he drove to work, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The streets looked different, the people walking by seemed more engaged with the world. His mind raced with possibilities. Could this be the opportunity he had been waiting for? Could he use this suit as a stepping stone to something bigger? He had never thought about advancing in his career, never imagined there was a world beyond the mop and bucket, but now, for the first time in his life, the idea didn't seem so impossible. When James arrived at work, the usual routine felt out of place. The building, the long halls, the unending rows of cubicles, it all seemed so small. For the first time, he saw it with new eyes. He had been a part of this machine for years, cleaning up after everyone, barely noticed, never acknowledged. But now, in his sharp suit, it felt like he was stepping into someone else's shoes. He wasn't just here to clean, he was here to be a part of something. Was he ready to make that leap? As he pushed his cart down the corridor, a couple of the office workers glanced up from their computers and did a double take. James didn't know whether to feel self-conscious or proud. Was he imagining it, or were people actually noticing him for the first time? It was unnerving, yet exhilarating. He had never felt this way before. He had always been invisible, a shadow in the background, but now, in this suit, he was visible. And with that visibility came an unfamiliar sense of power. He made his way to the break room, where he usually stopped to get a cup of coffee before starting his shift. The usual group of employees were gathered around the table, chatting idly. They stopped talking when James entered, and the silence was deafening. For a brief moment, it felt like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for him to say something. He felt out of place, like he didn't belong there. But then, something unexpected happened. "James, is that you?" one of the women, Claire, asked, her eyes wide with surprise. He nodded awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. "Yeah, it's me." "You look different," she said, her voice hesitant. "Not that you didn't look fine before, but, wow." James chuckled nervously. "I just bought a new suit," he said, not sure why he was explaining it to her. He hadn't meant to draw attention to himself, but now that he had, he didn't know how to handle it. Another co-worker, Greg, leaned forward with a smirk. "Well, look at you. Trying to look all fancy and important." James felt his cheeks flush. "I'm just trying something new." There was an awkward pause, but then Claire smiled warmly. "Well, it looks good on you. Really. It's nice to see someone here who actually cares about their appearance for once." James didn't know what to say. He had never been one to care about appearances, but now, in this moment, he realized that maybe it wasn't just about looking good. Maybe it was about feeling good. Maybe it was about feeling like he deserved more than what he had always been told he could have. The suit was just the beginning, but perhaps it was a sign that things could change for him. As he left the break room, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't sure what it meant, this new version of himself, but he was starting to understand something important. He had spent so many years accepting his place in the world, never questioning whether he could achieve more. He had always been the janitor, always been the background figure, but what if he didn't have to be? What if he could be more than that? The rest of the day passed in a blur. James went about his duties, but the way he interacted with others had changed. He didn't feel invisible anymore. People spoke to him more, acknowledged him in a way they never had before. It was as if the suit had unlocked something within him, something he hadn't even realized he was missing. He wasn't just cleaning the floors anymore, he was part of the team. He had a voice, he had value, and most importantly, he had the courage to step out of his comfort zone. By the time he finished his shift and headed home, James felt different. His mind was racing with possibilities. Could he really do this? Could he really leave behind the man he had been for so long and step into a new version of himself? It felt like a monumental decision, one that he wasn't sure he was ready to make. But deep down, he knew that things could never go back to the way they were. This suit, this new feeling, it had opened something inside him that could never be closed again. As he walked into his apartment that evening, James sat down on the couch, his mind still swirling with thoughts of what could be. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he had control over it. He wasn't just the janitor anymore. He was James. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The following morning, James awoke with a quiet sense of anticipation. The city outside his window was already bustling, the usual hum of traffic and distant chatter rising in the background, but inside his small apartment, everything felt still. He stood at the window for a moment, looking out over the skyline, his reflection in the glass almost unrecognizable. The man who had looked back at him just days ago was different. He was no longer the janitor, the invisible man who cleaned the office floors without so much as a second glance from anyone. No, now he was someone else, someone who had dared to step into a world that had always felt out of reach. The suit, which now hung at the foot of his bed, was a symbol of that transformation. But he wasn't sure what it really meant yet. The world had opened a door for him, and he wasn't sure if he should walk through it. That same suit, now carefully folded and waiting for him, had already begun to shape the way people saw him. It was no longer just a uniform to wear for a day, it had become the armor he didn't know he needed. His appearance had sparked something in others. There was the subtle nod of recognition from the office workers, the increased conversations as if they now saw him for the first time. They spoke to him like he was someone who mattered, someone with ideas, someone worth knowing. But James was still torn. Was it all just a mirage? Was this newfound respect really for him, or just for the suit? He dressed slowly that morning, taking extra care to ensure every detail was perfect. His shirt collar was crisp, the tie knotted tightly around his neck, and the suit jacket sat perfectly across his shoulders. There was no denying that, as he looked in the mirror one last time, he looked good. In fact, he looked powerful. The reflection staring back at him was no longer just the janitor, it was someone else entirely. But as he walked out the door, the weight of the decision he had made settled into his chest. This wasn't just about the suit. This wasn't just about looking the part. No, this was about living up to something he wasn't sure he was capable of. He had always kept his head down, accepting his place in the world. He had never aspired to more than what he had, until now. His mind was filled with questions. Was he ready to face a world where he wasn't invisible? Was he ready to demand more for himself? And if he did, would anyone listen? He had always worked in the shadows, in the spaces no one cared to look. But now, for the first time, people were looking at him, really looking at him, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. What if they saw through the illusion? What if they realized he was just a man wearing a suit, a janitor who had no place in the polished world of office managers and executives? His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as he made his way toward the office building. The world outside seemed bigger today, as though everything had expanded, but James was still uncertain whether he was ready to step into it. Could he truly belong in that world? Was he supposed to? Every inch of his being screamed at him to turn back, to stick to what he knew, to return to the safety of the janitor's closet where he had always lived. But something inside him held him firm. He couldn't go back to being the man he was before. Something had been unlocked, and he was determined to see where it led. When he walked into the building, the usual cold, sterile atmosphere of the lobby seemed less oppressive. He had always hated that feeling, being just one more anonymous face in the crowd. But today, as he walked across the marble floors, the echoes of his footsteps seemed different. It was as if the space had somehow changed, as if his presence there mattered. His eyes flicked around as he walked toward the elevator. It was the same elevator, the same buttons he had pushed 1,000 times before, but today, it felt different. It was almost as if the world was waiting for him to make a choice. The doors opened, and as he stepped inside, he caught the reflection of his sharp suit in the mirrored walls. He didn't even recognize himself anymore. As the elevator ascended, the weight of his decision settled on him again. He was standing at a precipice, and it was his move. As the doors opened on the top floor, he felt the eyes of everyone in the office turning toward him. It was subtle, but it was there. Whispers in the corners, raised eyebrows, the slow nods of recognition. He was no longer the janitor. In that moment, he could feel the invisible wall between him and the people who had once been untouchable, unreachable, starting to fade. There was a difference now. People didn't just look through him. They saw him. But as he began his duties, cleaning the same spaces he had always cleaned, it felt as though he was straddling two worlds. The man in the suit wasn't quite ready to face the world of office politics and high-stakes meetings. No, he was still just the janitor, after all. His job hadn't changed. The floors still needed to be swept, the trash emptied, the bathrooms cleaned. But the way he went about it now was different. He had an air of purpose about him, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. And it didn't go unnoticed. One of the managers, Sarah, approached him as he was polishing the glass doors near the main office. She seemed hesitant, almost as if she was unsure of how to speak to him now. "James, right?" she asked, her voice carrying a tone of unfamiliarity. He nodded, wiping the cloth across the glass. "Is everything okay?" she asked, as if probing for an answer. James glanced up at her, unsure of how to respond. "Everything's fine," he replied, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts running through his mind. There was a brief pause before she spoke again. I wanted to say, you look different today. It's good. I mean, it's a nice change." James felt a surge of pride at her words, but it was quickly followed by a twinge of insecurity. Was she complimenting the suit, or him? Was this what he had wanted all along? Recognition? Or was he still just the invisible man in the background? "I appreciate that," he said, forcing a smile. She smiled back. "It's good to see someone take pride in themselves. You've been working here for years, right?" "Yeah," James answered quietly. "I've been here a long time. You know, if you ever decide you want to do more than just clean, we're always looking for people to move up. I know a few departments that are hiring right now," she added, her voice casual but laced with an unspoken offer. James didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to laugh it off. Was she really offering him a promotion? Or was she just being polite? "Thanks," he said, nodding as he finished polishing the glass. "I'll keep that in mind." But as she walked away, the seed of possibility was planted in his mind. Maybe this was what it felt like to be seen, to be considered for something more. Maybe it wasn't just the suit that had changed everything, it was his willingness to stand up and be noticed. For the first time, he felt like he had a chance. But now, he was faced with a choice. Would he continue to stay in his current role, content with the life he had always known, or would he take the leap and reach for something bigger? The days that followed were a blur of contemplation and decision. James went through the motions of his job, cleaning the same offices, emptying the same trash bins, but each day he felt the weight of his transformation growing. The suit had changed him. It had given him confidence. But now he had to decide what to do with it. Would he remain the janitor? Or would he take the chance that had been handed to him? The pressure mounted with every passing day, and James began to realize something: he wasn't just cleaning the floors anymore. He was standing at the edge of a new life. And the question he had to answer wasn't about whether or not he was ready. The real question was, could he allow himself to be more than what he had always been? Would he allow himself to step out of the shadows, even if it meant taking a risk? The answer seemed obvious, but for James, it was anything but simple. James sat at his small desk, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a physical force. The office, which had once been just a place where he came and went, now felt like a world of opportunity, and that world was beginning to feel both inviting and intimidating. He could feel the pull of something bigger, something beyond the floors he had scrubbed and the trash bins he had emptied. It was as if he had stepped into a new life, and now, each step was one of uncertainty and excitement. The offer to move up in the company, to take a position that would elevate him beyond the janitor's closet, still lingered in his mind like a distant dream. But then there was the nagging voice in his head, the one that had been with him for as long as he could remember. The voice that told him to stay in his place. To be content with what he had. It was the voice that had told him for years that he wasn't meant for anything more than his menial job. He had always been told, either directly or indirectly, that people like him didn't rise above their station. He wasn't the kind of person who moved in the circles that mattered. He had learned to accept that, until now. The more James thought about it, the more he realized that his hesitation wasn't just about the fear of failure. It was about the fear of success. What would it mean if he truly succeeded in this new role? What if he made it to a place where he wasn't just the janitor, but someone with influence and power? Could he handle that kind of life? The life that came with expectations and pressure, the life where people would see him as more than just the quiet man who cleaned the floors? As the day wore on, the weight of his indecision only grew heavier. He couldn't focus on his work, his mind constantly drifting back to the choices that lay before him. Would he take that next step? Could he leave behind the familiar world of cleaning supplies and mops for a desk in an office with a view? Would he be accepted in a world where he had once been invisible? Around lunchtime, he took a break and wandered down to the small cafe on the ground floor of the building. As he stood in line, waiting for his coffee, he caught a glimpse of himself in the reflective glass of the counter. The man staring back at him was no longer the same person who had walked into this building just a few days ago. The suit, the sharp collar, the polished shoes, all of it made him look different. But deep down, he still felt like the same old James, the one who had always been overlooked, the one who had always cleaned up other people's messes without question. He wasn't sure who he was anymore, and that scared him. As he took his coffee and walked out of the cafe, he passed by a group of office workers gathered around the break room. One of the women, Kelly, looked up and smiled as he walked by. "Hey, James," she called out. "Looking sharp today." James smiled, nodding his thanks, but inside, he felt a wave of discomfort. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate the compliment, it was the way they saw him now. Was it the suit they liked? Was it the polished exterior that made them view him differently? Or had he really changed in their eyes? He couldn't help but wonder how much of it was real, and how much of it was just a superficial response to his new appearance. Kelly caught up with him just as he reached the elevator. "So, are you going to take that job?" she asked, her voice casual but laced with curiosity. He looked at her, surprised by the directness of the question. "What job?" "The one Sarah mentioned last week," she said. "You know, the promotion." James felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't told anyone about the offer, hadn't even let himself consider it seriously. The thought of moving up had been so far outside his realm of possibility that he hadn't allowed himself to entertain it. But now, standing in the elevator with Kelly, the words felt real, like they were part of his world instead of a far-off dream. "I don't know," he said, avoiding her gaze. "I'm still thinking about it." Kelly smiled knowingly. "Well, I think you'd be perfect for it. You've been here long enough, and honestly, you deserve more than what you're doing right now. You've got the skills. You just need the chance." Her words were like a spark in the dark. For the first time, someone else was telling him he had potential. Someone else was seeing him in a way that wasn't based on his role as the janitor, but as a person capable of more. But that voice inside him, the one that had held him back for years, was louder now, warning him of the risks. What if he took the job and failed? What if people found out he wasn't as capable as they thought he was? What if he was just pretending to be someone he wasn't? The elevator doors opened, interrupting his thoughts, and James stepped out, but his mind remained caught on Kelly's words. He had always told himself that he wasn't meant for anything more, but now, after hearing those words, something inside him shifted. Maybe he had been wrong all along. Maybe he was worth more than he had given himself credit for. The rest of the day passed in a haze. He went through the motions, completing his tasks, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about Kelly's words, about the possibility of stepping into something bigger. He thought about the weight of the suit he wore, the way it made him feel like he could do anything. But there was still that nagging fear, that voice telling him that this was all just a fantasy. That maybe he wasn't cut out for this kind of life. The truth was, James had been living in the shadows for so long that he didn't know how to step into the light. The world had always seemed so distant, so unreachable, and now that it was within his grasp, he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. What if people saw through him? What if he wasn't as capable as they thought? What if he failed and fell back into the shadows, even deeper than before? Later that evening, as he sat at home alone, staring at the empty walls of his small apartment, James realized something. He had been living his life in fear of what might happen. He had let his insecurities control him for far too long. He had convinced himself that he wasn't meant for anything more, that he was destined to stay in the background, cleaning up after others. But the suit, the compliments, the job offer, all of it had forced him to face a hard truth: he had been holding himself back all this time. As he thought about it, a wave of determination washed over him. He had spent too many years being afraid of stepping up, of demanding more. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to take the leap. The next morning, James walked into the office with a new sense of purpose. He had made up his mind. He was going to take the job. He wasn't going to let fear control him anymore. He was going to embrace this new chapter in his life, even if it meant facing the unknown. For the first time, he felt ready. Ready to be more than just the janitor. Ready to step into a future that was his to create. But as he made his way to the manager's office to formally accept the offer, something unexpected happened. He was stopped in his tracks by Sarah, the manager who had initially offered him the promotion. She looked at him with a serious expression. "James, can we talk for a second?" James felt a knot form in his stomach. Had he made a mistake? Had he misread the situation? The uncertainty that had plagued him all week rushed back in full force. "Of course," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah led him into her office, closing the door behind them. "I just wanted to talk to you about something important," she said, sitting down behind her desk. "I know you've been thinking about the promotion, but I want you to understand what it really means. It's not just about getting a higher position. It's about responsibility, about representing the company in ways you haven't before. And I need to know you're ready for that. This isn't a small decision." James listened carefully, his heart racing. What was she trying to tell him? What was she really asking? The weight of her words was beginning to sink in. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a chance to step into a new life, one that would come with challenges he wasn't sure he was ready for. But as Sarah's gaze met his, something inside him clicked. He wasn't just ready for this. He had to be ready. And so, James made the choice. He took the leap. James' first few days in the new position felt like a whirlwind. What had once been a world of mops and trash bins had now evolved into one filled with meetings, reports, and important decisions. The shift was both exciting and daunting. The office, with its sleek desks and computers, felt almost foreign to him. He was surrounded by people who had once seemed unreachable, the very same employees he had seen coming and going while he cleaned the floors. Now, they were his colleagues, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and intimidation as he navigated through his new responsibilities. His desk, once just a small cubicle in the back corner of the office, now seemed like a command center. It was his space, his place, but it felt unreal. His new role required him to interact with people at every level of the company. No longer just the quiet janitor, James was now responsible for delegating tasks, making decisions, and offering input in board meetings. At first, he struggled to find his voice in the midst of all the new faces and unfamiliar tasks. The voices that had once been so loud inside his head, those fears, those insecurities, were louder than ever. He questioned whether he really belonged here. Was he ready for this? Could he handle the pressure? The doubt was overwhelming, and it didn't help that the expectations were high. His colleagues seemed to expect him to hit the ground running, and every time he stumbled, the anxiety crept back in, like an unwanted shadow following him through his workdays. One particular afternoon, as James sat in a meeting, he found himself overwhelmed by a project that had been thrust upon him unexpectedly. It was a large initiative that involved multiple departments, and he was expected to coordinate and keep everything on track. He had no prior experience in this kind of role, and the more he read through the reports, the more it became clear that he was out of his depth. The team members who had been assigned to assist him were experts in their respective fields, and they all seemed so confident, so competent. But James felt like an imposter, sitting there, pretending to know what he was doing. As the meeting progressed, the room began to feel smaller. The walls seemed to close in on him as he struggled to follow the conversation, his mind racing to keep up with the technical jargon and industry terms. When someone asked for his input, his heart skipped a beat. What could he possibly contribute? He had no experience in this arena, he was still learning the ropes. When the meeting ended, James quickly excused himself and retreated to his office. He sat down at his desk, trying to catch his breath. He had failed. He had let himself down, and he had let his colleagues down. His doubts were taking over, and for the first time since accepting the promotion, he questioned whether he had made a huge mistake. The weight of the responsibility was pressing down on him. He had climbed to the top, but it felt like he was about to slip right back down. But as he sat there, his phone buzzed with a message from Kelly, the same woman who had encouraged him to take the job in the first place. "Hey, I saw you in that meeting. Don't let it get to you. Everyone has a learning curve. You've got this." The words were simple, but they hit him like a ton of bricks. He wasn't alone in this. Kelly, the woman who had believed in him from the beginning, was still there, still offering support. He realized then that he wasn't expected to be perfect. He wasn't expected to know everything from the get-go. What mattered was his willingness to learn, to ask for help when he needed it, and to push through the tough times. The people around him weren't judging him for every misstep, they were rooting for him, hoping he would succeed. The next few weeks were a series of highs and lows. Some days, he felt on top of the world, confident and capable, leading meetings and making decisions with clarity. Other days, he felt lost, unsure of himself, stumbling through complex tasks with no clear answers. But through it all, he kept moving forward, learning as he went. Each setback became an opportunity to grow. Each challenge was a lesson in resilience. One of the biggest tests came a month after he had started his new role. The company was in the midst of a major restructuring, and James had been asked to oversee the transition for the entire office. It was a monumental task, and the pressure was immense. He had to coordinate with various departments, manage logistics, and ensure that the restructuring went smoothly. But there were hiccups along the way. Systems were down, communication was delayed, and tempers flared. James found himself in the middle of a storm, trying to keep everything from falling apart. The weight of the responsibility was suffocating, and for a moment, he questioned whether he was in over his head. But then he remembered the lessons he had learned in the past few weeks. He wasn't alone in this. He had a team, and they were all working toward the same goal. With newfound determination, James reached out to his colleagues for help, asking for their input and expertise. Together, they worked late into the night, troubleshooting problems and brainstorming solutions. The task was daunting, but they were a team, and they were in it together. The days were long, and the stress was high, but James felt something he hadn't felt before, a sense of purpose. He wasn't just cleaning floors anymore, he was part of something bigger. And he wasn't just doing this for the company, he was doing it for himself. In the end, the restructuring was a success. The company transitioned smoothly, and James was praised for his leadership and problem-solving skills. The sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. He had faced his fears head-on and come out on top. But the victory was bittersweet. The journey had changed him in ways he hadn't expected. He had discovered strengths he didn't know he had, but he had also come face to face with the harsh reality of self-doubt and fear. The pressure of his new role had made him question everything: his abilities, his worth, his place in the world. But by pushing through those moments of doubt, he had learned something important: success wasn't about being perfect. It was about perseverance, learning from mistakes, and growing stronger in the face of adversity. James' story had become one of transformation, not just in terms of his job, but in terms of his sense of self. He had started as a janitor, someone who cleaned up after others, but he had become so much more than that. He had become a leader, a problem solver, someone who could take on challenges with confidence. And while the journey had been difficult, it had shaped him into someone who no longer doubted his own potential. As he stood in front of his office window one evening, looking out over the city skyline, he thought back to that moment when he had hesitated, unsure if he should take the promotion. He had almost let fear control his life. But he had chosen to push through it. He had chosen to embrace the unknown, to step into a new life, and in doing so, he had not only changed his own fate, but also the way others saw him. Now, he stood in that office, no longer the janitor who cleaned floors, but the man who had proven to himself and to others that he was capable of much more. It wasn't just about the job, it was about the person he had become. And as he looked back on everything he had overcome, he realized that this journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, but he was no longer afraid. He was ready for whatever came next. And with that, James made one final realization: he was no longer defined by his past. The future was his to shape, and he was ready to write the next chapter of his story.